Hi, and welcome back to the Self-Actualization in the Age of Crisis chapter summary series. I'm your host, Ron Rivers, and today we're going to be discussing Chapter 3, Economy, Labor, and Property, subsection Taxation. So taxation through the lens of systemic actualization is a means to an end. It supports the development of systems that give rise to individual actualization for anyone, regardless of birth lottery. Presently, we all know taxation right through our state and local governments, the federal governments, but we may also want to explore in the future intercommunity taxation as a means to progress the goals of, for example, of SpiritDAO. Now, I want to emphasize, and we kind of briefly talked about the nature of currency in our last video, but taxation in our immediate present is not in any way, shape, or form intended to fund social services at the federal level. I do want to make a distinction. At the municipal level and to some extent the state level, your tax dollars do directly fund social programs. But at the federal level, it does not. Taxation at the federal level is intended to be a kind of check and balance for the currency supply. It removes dollars from circulation, and that is its intent. Now, when we consider our existing, the existing forms of taxation, we can start with the U.S. The U.S. has what is often referred to as a progressive tax system. In fact, it has the most progressive tax system in anywhere in the world. What that essentially means is as your income rates increase, you pay more, right, on paper. Obviously, there's a ton of loopholes that ultimately have billionaires paying less taxes than the average individual. But that is the nature and kind of theory of it. In our European countries, European democracies leverage a VAT tax, a value-added tax, which essentially has a point of taxation at each step of the productive cycle. So from origination to the sale, there's kind of small taxes added along the way. Now, what's really fascinating that despite the U.S. having the most progressive taxation system in the world, we take in, on average, about 10% less than our European counterparts in relation to GDP. And I want to emphasize why that's important. When we consider taxation, the most important component of taxation is the aggregate tax take. How much money is coming in? The scheme and variety doesn't matter as much as the end goal, which is to increase capital to fund, let's say in our case, public goods. Also, we should note that the United States is by far the most inequitable democracy, which means that there is the greatest gap between our poor and wealthy in the United States than any other European nation or democracy. And that's really relevant because Europe has a much better track record of taking tax dollars and investing it in social securities, safety nets, and protections, suites of public goods, essentially. Now, in the text, I kind of evaluate a wide variety of taxation schemes. I'm only going to cover some of them here. A common one you may hear is that's really equitable, quote unquote, is the flat tax. So like a flat 15% tax on total income for everyone. That is to be candid, a foolish endeavor. A flat tax would only serve to deeply entrench the already extremely wealthy. It does nothing to redistribute wealth or advantage. And it really, if it was implemented, it would solidify the existing wealth holders pretty much beyond reproach at that point. Now, I do want to take a moment to briefly discuss the Nicholas Kaldor tax, which I argue in the text is the most effective form of taxation and should be the ideal. Essentially, what it does is it taxes consumption, which is easily identified as the difference between income and investment and savings. So anything not saved is considered spent. Anything that's off the books or kind of shady is considered spent. But why it matters is the rate of taxation in between those two numbers is extremely flexible. So what do I mean by that? So let's divide it into three, right? The bottom third, the middle third, and the top third. We might say the bottom third pays nothing, but they still get access to all the public works that we build with the social capital. The middle third might get, a very small and progressively growing taxation based on their consumption, and the top third might get an even greater number. But where it really shines is like that top 0.01%, where essentially there's no limit. So you might tax them $5 for every $1 they spend. Now, why this is an extremely relevant and extremely effective taxation mechanism is, as we discussed in the chapter of Billionaire God Kings of the 21st century, people with immense wealth cannot spend it all. And in many ways, their consumption is kind of just capped by the nature of being human. So what we want to do is just tax those things that they would normally just have to operate on, but tax them at such a rate where it really focuses on the redistribution of wealth in a means that is both doable, politically feasible, and also doesn't require violence to enact. Ultimately, I want to really emphasize that taxation, while commonly hated and commonly, we have a bunch of vitriol and dogma about it, ultimately it is a means of funding public works. And the future exists as decentralized microcommunities. That is the nature that we are heading towards. So when we think about taxation as a tool, it really is an incredible tool to serve the needs of those microcommunities and build these suite of global public works to allow really the proliferation of human imagination. Ultimately, taxation is a vehicle to support our systemic spiritual project of systemic actualization.